Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, my dear friends, students of the 4th year, Cairo Higher Institute's English Division. Good morning, and it's my pleasure to talk to you once again, and this time we shall continue what we started with last time when we started talking about argumentative essay. In our last lecture, we raised 7 questions and answered them. By the end of our last lecture, you have had the chance to answer these questions and, more importantly, to gather information regarding how to comprehend the meaning of argumentative essay, as well as the first pieces of information you need to understand so as you can write a good argumentative essay. Today, inshallah, we are going to talk about the language of argument. While writing an argumentative essay, you need to have an idea about the language you are going to use to communicate your ideas. What are the common aspects or characteristics of this language? What are the pieces of information that you need to keep in mind to write a good argumentative essay? Last time, while defining an argument, we said that it is not a fight. It is not a struggle between two parties. On the contrary, it is a reasonable discussion. It is a discussion based on your intellect, or in particular on your rational way of thinking. So the language you are going to use cannot be by any means a language of hostility or a language of vulgarity or, simply speaking, a rude language. Because someone is expressing a certain idea, a certain viewpoint, and you are either opposing him or taking his side, in both cases your language must be refined, elevated, must be a language of a scholarly endeavor that reflects your intellect. So forget about using a language that tells about fights or battles or war. You are not struggling with someone, because it is based on your logic. The language must be reasonable. If the argument is a piece of logical thinking written on a piece of paper, the language you use must be, again, able to stimulate the mind. Otherwise, what persuades me to take your side? If your language is not a language of logic, how can you address my intellect? How can you address my way of thinking, my way of evaluating what you are praising? So please keep in mind that it is a language of the mind, not the language of emotions. You can have your personal experience, of course. You can use some figures of speech, but they mustn't be dominant. Again, the word rational or reasonable is a word or is the adjective which helps you to portray the world of your writing. How can you be logical and you are imbalanced? How can you be logical and you are anxious or worried about what you are telling? So please, to be logical means that you are calm, that you are trying to address your reader's mind, that you are trying to have an influence on your reader, and this influence is mainly balanced. It is usually given without exaggeration. For example, I can say that Hamlet is the most controversial Shakespearean character in drama. This is a language of exaggeration. This is a language of overemphasis on your point of view. It shows your idea, but it is too much to say this. So please use a language that is not exaggerated, a language that is not metaphorical, especially when you are using some figures, statistics, or pieces of information or facts to support your ideas, to support your claim. Of course, every word has a special sense that you try to convey to your reader, but don't depend on affecting or influence the reader's emotions, and that's all. Because all in all, we said that an argument is a piece of writing or talking that addresses the mind, so as to provide evidence. How can you support your ideas? By evidence. How can you persuade me to take your side? By a number of doings, including using facts and statistics, figures. For example, don't tell me that the number of illiterate people in Cairo, for example, is increasing or is decreasing. You must provide me in a figure. You must provide me with statistics. Who told you that this number increases or decreases? A certain figure published by a concerned governmental party or even a non-governmental body. There is no problem. But tell me your source and the figure you are using to build up your claim. Sometimes you are writing and you keep your reader distanced. In other words, you keep a very big distance between the reader and you. And this is not acceptable in all cases. You need to give your reader the sense that he is involved, that he shares your ideas with you, or even the ideas you are telling about. So in this case, one of the technical devices, one of the techniques that you can use is a rhetorical question. A question whose answers is not expected. You raise a question just to get your reader involved. Because we have an argument, and at a certain moment you may refer to a counter argument, and the argument may have more than one interpretation from different points of view, you are not accepted if you just focus on your claim, on your point of view. You can go and discuss, or in other words, challenge or refute the other viewpoints. but please don't overweight your own point of view. In other words, you shouldn't neglect the other points of view raised regarding your argument or your claim, and at the same time don't give overweight to what you support, especially when it is not given its rational sense. And that's why, as you can read, there is no negligence of other points of view. You can't neglect them. So as to make the writer appear rational, you need to be fair. If you are going to refute or challenge a suggestion or a point of view, discuss it first, challenge it second, and third, give me your conclusion. Of course, you must give overweight to your conclusion because it is what you argue, it is what you claim, but don't give overweight to your counter arguments. And that's why they are used to refute the claimed ones, the ones that they are focal points of arguments. Again, this is the third part. No balance is given since the writer gives overweight to his viewpoint. These three tips or pieces of advice are interrelated. So number one, don't neglect the other's point of view. If you are talking about a counter argument, you use this counter argument in order to refute the raised argument or the main argument. And of course, there is no balance given between the argument and the counter argument, because you are arguing or you are challenging a counter argument. In each case, you must provide evidence for your idea, for your claim. In each case, you need to stress what you argue, stress what you conclude with. Since you are all students of English literature and you are familiar with the term quotations, quotations can be used again as evidence. But of course you will select the arguments, and based on the arguments you are raising, you will base your selection of evidence accordingly. In other words, select from the text of a play, the text of a novel, the text of a short story, what proves your argument or what challenges a counter argument. In other words, quotations are inserted in the argument to give the reader the sense that many people share it with you. Many people take you either in the same direction or in the opposite direction. It depends upon whether you are defending an idea or refuting its suggestion. So please be careful that not all quotations are acceptable unless they support your claim, unless they provide evidence for what you say. Because you are talking about a piece of writing, and it is not a piece of writing that addresses emotions or addresses feelings, it addresses your mind, it is preferable, it is preferred to use the formal style. So please use standard English as an example, or use formal style in the way that enables you to address your reader's mind. One of the very first pieces of advice we gave you while you were all students of the first year is to avoid repetition. But now, if repetition signifies emphasis, it becomes acceptable to use. In other words, don't generalize. Yes, repetition is a point of weakness if you cannot manage it. But here, if you can use repetition for emphatic purposes, to emphasize, to stress your idea, of course, it is a good piece of advice. In other words, you need to challenge a certain idea or refute it. Once you use an active verb that enables you to challenge it, and then you may insert a quotation which challenges the idea. And third, you can use your personal experience so as to refute the ideas. And each one can be repeated in more than one way of writing. Again, because you are students of English literature and you are familiar with this term illustration, you understand that in all of your literary writings, you need illustrations. An illustration, for those who cannot remember its meaning, means to use some words written by the author, based on the text, of course, taken from the text of a play, of a novel, of a poem, a short story, to support what you are talking about. For example, you can say that King Lear is irrational while addressing his three daughters at the early beginning of the play, and he was irrational in the sense that he depended on appearance to evaluate each daughter's love to him. Okay, how can you prove it? How can you provide evidence to this claim? You must give me few lines from the text or a speech based on the text. If you have a choice between direct and indirect speech, direct speech is more acceptable because you are addressing again your way of thinking. You need to have a very precise information to give. The information or the data you are going to present must be direct, so as you can avoid any possible misunderstanding. If you enable your reader to fall in misunderstanding, you will suffer a lot to have him once again on the right track. So please be careful that direct speech is preferable. I think that the language of argument has more than this, but these are very few tips of advice so as to enable you to draw your lines, to draw your track of writing argumentation. Here we have an idea about some words or phrases while using argumentation. For example, I'd like to raise a suggestion. I'd like to say something and support it. How can I start? For example, I can say that I argue that King Lear was irrational at the early beginning of the play. Or I suggest that King Lear was not rational while addressing his three daughters at the early beginning of the play. I claim that King Lear was not rational while addressing his three daughters at the early beginning of the play. I assert that. So, argue, suggest, claim, and assert are four verbs you can use as starters to raise your claim. This is if you are adopting a specific point of view and you are trying to prove it. Sometimes there is a point of view that is raised and you need to refute it. You need to challenge it. How can you challenge it? Simply speaking, write it and you can use on the contrary and then say whatever you like. If you are presenting both sides, this is on the one hand and this is on the other hand. So on the other hand, so while people, or whereas a group of critics believes that Lear was rational, others believe that he was not rational. So in this case, you have the argument and the counter argument, and you are going to give overweight to the counter argument. You can use other words like however or in contrast, again, which signal counter argument. In between, one may argue that. So here you are introducing the argument. However, so you are going to start talking about your counter argument. And these are just examples, nothing more, nothing less. For the time being, I hope that this lecture wasn't too long for you, especially while talking about some technicalities of writing an argumentative essay. I hope that these tips or these pieces of advice are taken into consideration while writing an argumentative essay, and of course the phrases as well as the tips must be added to the 7 answers to the 7 questions we answered last time, and we had an idea about them at the early beginning of this lecture. So I hope that you are going to use all these pieces of information so as you can write a good argumentative essay. For the time being, I thank you so much. I hope you all the best and see you next time.